Welcome to the Rig Doctor podcast, where I'm giving out remedies to soothe your ailing tone and fix your sick pedal boards. I'm your host, Mason Marangella, aka the Rig Doctor. I've been building rigs for over a decade for many of the industry's top pros, and now I'm giving away all my secrets to DIYers just like you. I'm giving away all of my tips, tricks, resources, and easy hacks that I've learned over the years so you can build a pedal board just like a pro. If you want to support this podcast, you can do it in a bunch of different ways. Easiest way is to write us a review on iTunes, or you could follow us on social media, places like Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. You can also support us financially by purchasing one of my products, Vertex Effects, from any of our authorized dealers all around the world. Or you could become a member of our Patreon. We have several Patreon memberships as low as $4.99 a month that give you exclusive access to private live streams, Q&As, exclusive deals and discounts on Vertex products, as well as early access to new product releases. Also, you can get personalized one-on-one phone and email conversations with me, the Rig Doctor, to coach you through your next rig build. This could be as in-depth as troubleshooting a problem on your pedal board in real time with me, or some emails advising you on next steps, on certain pieces of gear to buy, and good stuff just like that. I don't want money, though, to be the reason that you can't engage with the Patreon side. So if you don't have the means to do it at this particular time, that's no problem. We actually offer a free version of our standard account at no charge if means are an issue. That means if you just send us an email requesting a free account, we grant 100% of those accounts, no charge whatsoever. We just trust that once things have changed for you and you can afford the $4.99 a month, you let us know. But until then, your account remains free. I also want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Blue Microphones. Kevin Walt at Blue Mics is just the man. He gave us everything. We have Yeti mics, we have boom arms, we have pop filters, we have everything that a podcaster would need, and we supremely appreciate that. Thank you to Blue Microphones. In today's episode, I speak with Michael Pope from Bethel Music, who's now doing his own thing as a producer and a session guitarist in Nashville. Michael details for us exactly the gear that he used throughout all the generations and all the record releases from Bethel, all the way back from 2013 with Tides up through Victory in 2019, and also what he's using now, his top picks for worship guitar players and guys that just want to get great tone. So Michael also talks about drawing from different influences, both from CCM music and from secular music, and how he sort of bridged and had the influences of other people at Bethel, like Bobby Strand, to help sort of figure out how to puzzle those together to get great iconic guitar parts and really define the sound of a decade and generation of CCM music and beyond. I give you Michael Pope. All right, so we're live with Michael Pope, the man, the myth, the legend.
Here we are.
And I'm so glad that we were able to get this working properly because, again, we did this a couple weeks ago with Doug Doppler, and it was quite a stretch. And you know, maybe there's just something that the conversation topic is going to be so prolific that YouTube can't handle it live. So
we shall see.
So we're going to get into it, but I really appreciate, Michael, you making the time to talk with me, and you've always been incredibly gracious. You know, even when I think I sort of like either cold called you or messaged you on Instagram years ago to ask you about, you know, considering some of our products, and you were always very gracious and invited us up to Reading and gave us the VIP treatment at what was then Thunderbird Studios, and in the coolest. That was probably one of the coolest Vibe studios I've ever seen. Oh man,
I miss that place on a daily basis. I mean, we had a cool little spot here in Nashville for a little while before this whole COVID thing went down, but man, that spot was so gorgeous.
Yeah, we filmed I think 2 videos there.
Yeah, I think so.
And for people that never were there or never saw these videos, can you sort of explain the vibe? It was like a train depot or something, right?
Well, it was across from the train tracks, but essentially it was kind of one of the last like historic buildings left in Reading. And so it's this old, huge brick hotel. Kind of a weird situation where like everybody upstairs and above us was this all like low-income senior citizens housing. So we always had interesting people roaming around, but the bottom space was for years like a lawyer's office and also a police station. But I mean, just, high ceilings. We had a little loft area, and it's all just like old, brick from, back in the day. And, we ended up having 3 separate rooms in there. So we had an A room, a B room, and an office. And so, I mean, for us, it was the dream setup there, man.
Yeah, and even had sort of like a little like lookout point on the second floor there, that looked down into it was one of the coolest places to film, the vibiest places to film. I remember that we took, our videographer at the time, David, and, it was like there were so many different ways that you could shoot something and it would look incredible. It's like, what do you want to see? Do you want to see, the beautiful brick, or do you, like it was just so many options. It was incredible.
Yeah, it's hard to find a bad angle in there, man, between all the gear we had crammed in there and then the brick and the big windows, man. It was great.
Yeah. You were one of the few reasons that I would come to Reading,
Oh, man. I appreciate it. Well, and even talking about, getting called or emailed or, however we met, I had been a fan of yours for a long time, since before you even made pedals. I was digging into, all the pedal board greats, be it the Bradshaws and the Cornish guys and the LA sound design. I was like, oh, wait, like this Vertex guy's down in the Bay Area. Like, that's super close. And I think I even emailed you one time just about like, I wonder what the wait would be. And, it was a super long wait, and, we were touring all the time, and I certainly didn't have the means for like a rig, B rig kind of a thing. So never got to do it. But when we finally, linked up over the pedals you were making, man, that was a cool moment for me. So thanks for reaching out all those years ago.
I think that you actually had, when I was there, I learned that you had already had like one of the Arion choruses that I had modified.
Yeah.
And so you already had a few of the things that I wasn't aware of before I got there.
No, you were the best, because I had that chorus, and it, still is my favorite one. And I had it, but somehow it broken the foot switch or something on tour. And I think I posted on Instagram about it, like, oh man, I got to get this thing fixed. And then you responded and fixed it super quick. And yeah, it's super great, man. It's sitting right over here. I still use it all the time.
I'm glad. So what, in sort of the early days of what when you first started kind of doing music professionally, how old were you when you kind of really started, making, a living doing music? Do you kind of remember when that all started for you? Yeah,
probably around like 2000, 10 or 11. So I was like 20, 21 is when I first started working with Bethel Music. I've traveled heavily and toured since I was a teenager. I'd start little bands with friends, and we'd tour around the state or surrounding states, or I would do these like really long, extended road trips with family in my like early teenage years. And so I've kind of always had a little bit of a background in, playing music. I've played guitar since I was 3. I've just been obsessed with it forever. And so, I was, probably 20, 21 when I started, like traveling and working with Bethel Music.
Yeah. And what was the point with which you decided, because you're from, is it Oklahoma, or are you from?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're from Oklahoma.
Little backwoods town called McAllister, Oklahoma, man. Ain't nothing out there but a prison and a bunch of rednecks and some really great people as well. But yeah, I went out to Reading to check out a school. It was kind of one of those things. I'd finished high school and was trying to figure out, how did I want to get into music. And in the town I grew up, there wasn't really a scene, and so I knew I was for sure getting out of town, and had some friends who were out in Reading that I was really close with and still am. And so I just went out there just to kind of figured my life out. I figured, okay, I'll do this like church ministry school thing for a year, and then move to LA or New York and like play music and sin and like all those kind of things. So yeah, man, got there and plans definitely changed. Ended up really connecting with what was going on at the church, which was kind of a first for me, even kind of growing up in that world. And yeah, went out there with no other intention other than to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and ended up being there for the better part of 10 years and getting to tour all over the world and do some pretty great things with them. So, yeah.
What was it that sort of first it convinced you or enrolled you in the idea of becoming a part of like the Bethel music and all the music that was created from approximately, we said, what, about 2012, 2013 to 2019?
Yeah. I mean, for me, they had something unique. I've never really been the guy that, like, it's funny, I've played on a lot of church music, but I've never really like listened to it in my free time or anything like that. But for me, it was kind of the first church music group that I connected with in kind of two ways, because before them, there'd really only been two camps. You had these like really, really, professional produced, really clean, like CCM artists that was just like, everything was perfect. But it, for me, and I think a lot of people, it felt a little bit lifeless. And then you'd get these like really crazy, charismatic, bands and musicians that were just really, really sloppy, and there was a lot of life and energy and really great stuff to connect with heart-wise in the music, but it was usually recorded terribly and just sounded so awful, like you couldn't hardly stand to listen to it unless you really just forced yourself. And I feel like Bethel Music was really the first group or record label or whatever you want to define them as, to really kind of bridge those two gaps. A lot of what we did, we wanted it to sound awesome and produced, and we put a lot of time into songwriting and thinking out parts for the songs and that side, but also wanted to leave room and would leave room for everything to change last minute. So yeah, that was really the thing for me that felt unique. In my opinion, I didn't sense anything else out there that was doing that. And so to have an opportunity to be a part of that was pretty great.
And do you remember there being any sort of one person or a conversation or something that sort of made the pivot where you're like, oh, actually I really want to be involved with Bethel music in particular, if you didn't necessarily come to Reading with that already in mind?
It wasn't, one person or thing. It was just kind of, I think, being in that community and just connecting with it all the way around. There's so many just wonderful people there with really, really great hearts and great intentions, and yeah, I think just being in the environment and connecting to it is what made me want to get involved. I started playing music in the school kind of first and foremost, which at the time is where they got a handful of musicians. They kind of had a set team with another group, Jesus Culture. That was kind of their main group of musicians for the church. And then you kind of had these guys from the school, like myself. Dan McKenzie was one of those guys. There's a group of us that kind of came up from the school, and we've all done music our whole lives, and so it was just kind of a natural involvement there with some people. And yeah, I mean, it was a very organic thing. It just kind of happened. They asked me to, hey, like, we noticed you play really well in school. Can you cover a few sets at the local church just to help out? And so I was like, yeah, I can totally do that. And then my first summer there was like, all right, like, my savings are gone. Like, I got to figure out, how to get a job if I'm going to stick around for a little while. And literally, I think as soon as I'm like, throwing, resumes out, applying for just weird jobs, I got an email from Joel Taylor, the head of the label. He said, hey, we're doing this record and we'd love if you'd play on it. And so, yeah, ever since then, that just kind of opened the door to recording and touring. And that was kind of a pivotal time for them, too.
Was that Tides?
That would have been For the Sake of the World.
For the Sake of the World, okay.
Yeah, and I pulled that up on Spotify because like I said, I'm terrible with timelines. And so that came out in 2012.
Okay. Tides would have been in 2013.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tides was kind of the first record that, like, the guitar duty was really on me.
Yeah.
To kind of fill, like, For the Sake of the World thing, Jeffrey Cundy and Ian McIntosh were producing that. And so the way that album came together is Dan, myself, and our friend Graham, who was a great drummer, kind of pre-produced the whole thing, and then Jeffrey and Ian kind of had their versions of everything, and then we just, sent our stuff to them. They kind of smashed it together with all the bits and pieces that they liked, and then we kind of fleshed it out that way. But Tides was really where it's like, all right, the Jesus Culture guys have kind of gone off to do their thing, so now it's
so they left
to
they left to Sacramento to start their own thing.
Yeah. So that was that, and that's also when Bobby Strand kind of came on the scene and got involved as well. So, yeah.
So when you first entered Bethel, who were the other guitar players that were kind of in the kind of the scene there?
It was Jeffrey Cundy. He was kind of the main guy. He oversaw all the local dudes at the church, and there was another guy, incredible dude. I haven't seen him in quite some time, and I miss the heck out of him. His name's Kyle Coulard. Really great guitar player. I think he lives in Coeur d'Alene now with a wife and a bunch of kiddos, which is great. But yeah, those were kind of the two guys, and I just kind of got smashed into the group with them somehow.
Yeah, I mean it's a high bar already. And during that time, like kind of during the first kind of record in Tides, was the gear pretty much the same, or did it evolve more as you took on more of the guitar playing load in the music?
It definitely evolved more. When I was doing For the Sake of the World, that was really the stuff that I just had from home. That was, the stuff I'd bought at that point hadn't kind of been through the ringer of like, how does this track, how does this sound, with a live band or anything. It was just all the gear I had from Oklahoma. And so, yeah, the For the Sake of the World was a lot of struggle, I think, for me sonically with my gear. And then, Tides would have been where I started to flesh that out a little bit more with the group as well, because I think that was the thing. Bobby kind of had his way of doing things, and then our engineer Chris Greeley was a big influence on me growing up, playing in a band that I was really into, and so my tone kind of came together with everybody else a little bit after that record.
Do you remember what any of the kind of the key fundamental pieces were that you used before you really kind of started assembling your own gear? Outside of what you had collected, what did that rig look like?
Oh, for sure, man.
What did the
I had a
V1
Boss
look like?
reverb. I had a Boss reverb that was like, the reverb pedal to have.
James Duke still uses it.
Yeah, he rocks it, man. It's crazy. I can't stand the way those things sound now. It just does this like weird, hairy sound for me. But I used to love that thing. Yeah, so I had that. I had an Eventime time factor. Mm-hmm. I didn't have bad gear. I had a Keeley modded Maxon OD808 that nice. I thought I loved, but I actually hated. I learned later on in life I am not a tube screamer guy. Gosh, what else did I have? I had a Keeley compressor, like the old 2-knob, a bunch of Keeley stuff, because being from, I was in Edmond, and that's where Robert
he was the hometown hero.
Yeah, so that was, I had, I think, a modded blues driver from him, which I still have somewhere. So just, a couple simple pieces like that.
Nice. And then what was kind of like when you started to evolve by the time kind of Tides was coming together, what were some of like the big shifts gear-wise that you made from that? Yeah.
The timeline that's when the timeline got involved. That pedal had just come out and everyone was freaking out over it. And, I was on that train as well. Yeah. That thing was a game changer. So when I finally had a, digital pedal that could somewhat cop the Memory Man thing or, a better tape delay, because that's the kind of stuff I was always into. I was, stoked when that thing came out. I started pushing the amps a little bit harder around that time too. I've always, even from the time I was like early teens, had a ZVEX SHO on the board, and so I started using that to kind of push the amps a little bit harder rather than using a tube screamer or something. I probably got onto the X-Bandora stuff around that time through Chris Greeley. He had used that thing a lot, and I had heard about it from being a big Billy Gibbons fan and hearing stories of how he'd stack like 3 of them up. And that time was, I changed things up a lot. That was kind of when I first was like, all right, I've got a little bit of money. I can, start buying and trading and selling some overdrives. I think I had a CMAT Mods overdrive of some kind.
Oh yeah, the Signa drive.
No, it was the Buddha or Buddha.
Okay.
I no idea what it was based on, but yeah, that was a cool pedal.
What about amps? What kind of amps were you using back then?
I've always been an AC30 guy, but the first real amp I ever bought, I saved up when I was like 16 to get it, was a 65 amps London combo.
Nice.
Those amps they came through a shop
scaling
in Edmond, and like I played one and seen a couple other guys play them. I mean, Peter Stroud obviously, and Drew Shirley, and some of those guys. And was just like, oh my god, they sound amazing. So mowed a bunch of lawns and did a bunch of construction work until I could buy one of those.
Nice. What about guitars? What were you using back then?
That was mostly just a Tele. I had a Mexican Fender Tele that I beat to hell and stripped the finish off the back of the neck and threw lollers in it, and just kind of that rotted out Telecaster. And then honestly just what was ever sitting around the studio, the sound house, the studios that we were tracking at, they had a couple Gretches around, so I think I would have used like a White Falcon. Gabe Wilson, who was the producer, has one of my favorite Gretsch guitars, which is like an early 90s double cut Black Falcon, which is a pretty rare Gretsch, and that guitar is amazing. So we used that a bunch. And I probably used Brian's Duesenberg as well on that.
Nice.
So just a handful of things, nothing too crazy. I mean, it was mostly that Tele. That was really the one guitar I had, and I think maybe halfway through that record too, we took months to record that thing. So there was a lot of change, but I think I got a Les Paul Jr. somewhere in there too, so that was probably used on some of it as well.
Were there any other big kind of pivots between then and like the We Will Not Be Shaken in 2015, or was it just sort of working with that sort of stuff? What were some of the maybe major changes in the sound, or were there many major changes in the sound between then and 2015?
For me, I think it was just kind of from that like end of Tides thing, but between Tides and even like We Will Not Be Shaken, there's the whole You Make Me Brave record that was in between that.
Yeah, the live one.
Yeah. And then also, I mean, Tides live. So I mean, fairly quickly I kind of stumbled upon, I guess, what I would call like my staple gear for that era. The Timeline was that. When the Big Sky came out, I jumped on that pretty quick. I've always gone for like real mid-rangey tones, so like the SHO and the X-Bandora went a really long way for me. And then when the Kilt pedal came out from JHS, I jumped on that just because it was like, this is great. I can leave the old, harder to find fragile pedal at home and tour with something newer. And so that's when the Kilt showed up, and I mean the Superbolt came out at that time. So really it was just kind of trying different things, and having guys like Bobby or Chris Greeley to kind of bounce things off of, pretty quickly fell into like that as a staple.
Yeah.
And I'd probably you got to throw a Pog in there. I think no matter what kind of music you're playing these days, the Pog's probably going to be around, and a Walrus audio compressor. And that was the staple for years, man.
Yeah. So what would you say now are like sort of the essential pieces? Like if somebody's like, I want to get the Michael Pope Bethel music tone, What do
Well,
you
if you
think
want-
are sort of the things
If you want
they
the
need?
Bethel music tone, then that stuff right there is it, man. I used, the kilt and the Super Bolt for gain stuff. The Strymon pedals were all the wet effects, and a Walrus Audio compressor. Like that was the sound for the Bethel music stuff. Now, I mean, who knows? It could be anything. Doing more session work, it's become less about having
Sure.
one rig for everything and more about like how many different sounds can I have at my disposal, because I might be doing a church record today, but next week it'll be an Americana record. The week after that it's an indie record, so maybe I'm not even using amps. Maybe I'm just plugging right into a pre or something. So it could be
Right.
anything now.
In guitar wise, you obviously evolved from the Mexican Telecaster. When did you first kind of get hip to the Veritas stuff?
So that also kind of came about from Chris Greeley and Bobby Strand. They came down to Reading from Portland.
Okay.
And Bobby and I were both kind of looking for touring guitars, because the Fender and the Les Paul Jr. I had, and Brian had ended up giving me that Duesenberg Carl Carlton, which is a great guitar. Those guitars were fine, but it was just constant tweaking on them on the road. Like every time I'd pull them out from under a plane, I'm like, oh my God, like I gotta reset up this telly because the neck is moved, and the Les Paul was especially tough, sharp frets and all. And so one day Chris was like, we've got this guitar builder friend up in Portland who is like really, really good, and he's got this company that's pretty new. Like we should check him out and see, if he'd build a guitar for us. And that was around doing the You Make Me Brave record. And so, we got on the phone, called him up, and Casey was just, from day one, like super, super nice. Like on his own dime, called a bunch of clients in Portland that had bought guitars from him, because, little shop like that, you don't have any guitars just sitting around. They've all been purchased or they're still being built. But he called all these guys that had bought guitars and was like, hey, can I borrow your guitar for a week so I can take it down so these guys can check it out? So, on his own dime, he shows up with like 7 or 8 guitars, and they were all just amazing. They played perfectly. We got a couple loaners at one point, and, throwing them under a plane, pulling them back out, never had to mess with them or tweak on them or do anything. Like they were just workhorse guitars, and they sounded great. And, at the time, custom guitars were really just, for the most part, a bunch of guys slapping together a bunch of cheap Fender parts. And I was like, well, what's, the point in spending money on one of those guitars? Like I could build one of those myself. And I essentially did with the, Mexican Fender that I had modded out.
Right.
So it's just kind of like a perfect scenario, meeting this guy who's a great luthier and built great guitars. And yeah, we just, built a great relationship together. And I genuinely love playing his guitars, even still to this day. And so, yeah, it was just one of those things that, friend of a friend, and you try it out and it just works. And, it made more sense to me to buy guitars from him that I knew worked, rather than, trying to fit the vintage style stuff, which is kind of the other thing guitar wise I'm into. I've just always been into old guitars and old amps, Yeah, that was just a little difficult to make work on the road. So, yeah, the Veritas stuff was great.
What's the story with your '70s Strat that kind of looks like the Edge Strat? How did you come across that?
Okay, so just again another friend in Reading a couple years ago. He great guitar player. His name's Jason Miller, and he was kind of getting out of music and playing guitar. He had played guitar with our friend Gabe Wilson for a number of years and other bands, and played at the church for a little while. But was moving into like coffee and culinary stuff for work. So over time, he would slowly sell his stuff off, and he was a vintage nut, man. Like I got that red AC30 from him. I got an old like Rat pedal and some other stuff from him. Like he had really great gear, and one day he just sent me a list. I was sitting in an SFO in the United Lounge, and I got a long list of a text from him. Hey man, I'm selling some stuff. You interested? And I just happened to be looking for a Strat, saw the Strat on the list, and was like, there's no way you're selling that, because it was his birth year guitar. That was kind of the other thing. That was one of his more special guitars. And so I was like, are you selling it? And he's like, yeah, if you bought it or if Gabe bought it, I could let it go. And I just feel bad it doesn't get played. So I was like, dude, I'll take it, hands down, because I'd played it a couple times and knew I liked it. So yeah.
Nice.
I tell you, man, people rag on those old 3-bolts, but as long as you're not flying them and traveling with them too much, they're some pretty great sounding guitars.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, certainly there's enough polyurethane on those to keep them stable.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the other thing, too. This one's worn in pretty good. And I think, back when it was maybe not considered a vintage guitar like it would be now, he had some of the finish and stuff removed by playing and also by force. So I think that helps too. And this is actually probably one of the lighter ones I've played. Yeah, because
sometimes they can be like Les Pauls. They're so heavy.
Dude, I picked one up in Black Book a few months ago, and was like, oh my god, this guitar, it's like a 60s Les Paul or something. It's just like 1,000 pounds. I was like, man, I'm really glad I have a light one. My back could not take it anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was doing one of these talks with Paul Jackson Jr. a couple weeks ago, and that guitar that he used on all the Michael Jackson stuff, he said was an 11-pound solid rosewood Strat.
Jeez, man.
And so there can be a thing,
No, there totally is, man. I swear, the more I get into session work, and the more I kind of listen to other session guys and hear what they have to say, there's a place for everything, man. There's not really a bad guitar tone. It's just finding what's right for the song. And heavy guitars can sound just as great as light guitars in the right context, man. I've got some actually one of my 503s, which is like the Casey's version of like a ES335 or something. My red one is not a particularly light guitar, but it has a sound and it really resonates well. And so I think maybe some of the stigma of, well, it's got to be super light to resonate, isn't always the case. Like the heavy stuff can sound really great too. Sure.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. There's certainly a place for everything, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
light or heavy. So we kind of talked about the gear. I kind of want to know about what was it that sort of called you to Nashville? I mean, you'd been doing almost 10 years with Bethel music.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think I saw you on one of the last tours that you did.
Yeah.
With them. And so what was it that kind of called you to go to Nashville?
Well, funny thing, the Nashville thing was family. My wife was born and raised here, kind of a rare thing, I guess. Her entire family is here, and my whole family's in Tulsa now. So I think I just kind of reached a point doing the Bethel music thing for so long, and I mean that Bethel music has changed a lot over the years, and it's still wonderful, and there's times where I miss it, but I think I reached a point where I was ready to take a break from certainly touring and traveling all the time, and kind of hitting things as heavy, and being newly married can do that. Touring is really, really hard on relationships. Absolutely. And I think I kind of reached a point too there where I felt like I capped out a little bit, like there wasn't really room for me to grow as a player anymore in that position. Yeah. And I just like, I kind of have to keep that forward momentum going. Like if I feel like I've plateaued somewhere and just settled for something, like that's just a really frustrating place for me to be. So moving to Nashville really had nothing to do with music or anything. It just happened to be, I had left Bethel Music for, those reasons. And the wildfires, swept through Reading and that whole area right after that. And so, once that happened, and my wife and I just kind of watched the housing market go a little crazy over there. And I was like, I feel like our landlords are going to sell this house because they're just going to get way more for it now than they ever will. And sure enough, they gave us notice like, hey, 60 days and you got to be out. And we kind of looked at each other and said, well, we weren't really planning on moving to Nashville for years still, but it just feels like that's the right move for us. So packed up and moved across the country, and here we are.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to see that you're reinventing yourself in this new fashion, and I think that you and I have talked about this a little before, but I think it's an interesting perspective that I'd like to hear, or maybe talk with you more about. One thing that I notice in particular with a lot of friends and people that I know very well that are in the CCM scene, either as listeners and aspiring players and for a worship team and things like that. Yeah. A lot of them really only have experience with Christian music.
Yeah.
And one thing that you and I talk about, and even with Dan, the unsung hero,
Oh yeah.
of this podcast in particular.
Absolutely.
Is that you have a lot of influences that exist independently of Christian music.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of players they miss out on a lot of the influences that actually work their way into Christian music that maybe started in secular music or were players that started in secular music that then became saved and started playing in churches and stuff like that, but certainly their influences stayed with them. What do you think is sort of the importance of being able to pull musical influences across genres and things like that? And what were some of the influences that you feel like you relied heavily on that influenced the guitar playing that you've done up to this point?
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, it's all about connection. Doesn't matter what kind of music you're listening to. Hopefully you're listening to it because it connects with something in you, whether it's Christian music or not. Mm-hmm. For me, I've always struggled a little bit with that separation, and I even grew up in an environment where I was only allowed to listen to Christian music for a lot of those kind of earlier formative years, and I would always sneak into my dad's record collection, like, oh man, like I would look at all these cool like record covers and stuff and be like, man, like what does the Fix sound like? What does ZZ Top sound like? What does like Pat Benatar sound like? What do the Cars sound like? Oh my God, this Dire Straits cover is cool. Oh my God, Led Zeppelin 3, you can spin the record jacket like a kaleidoscope. Like, I was just always, I don't know, just fascinated with music no matter what it was, and all I've ever looked for is what connects with me. So when I was like 13 or 14 and my parents were finally like, okay, like we'll let up a little bit, we'll get you a little turntable and you can start listening to some of these records, man, I just ate it up. I just love it, man. I just love music. So I think, in terms of pulling influence, it's not necessarily about like, okay, like, church music all sounds the same, so I got to make it sound like, Led Zeppelin meets Tame Impala meets The National meets, whatever.
That'd be interesting though.
Yeah. It's just about, again, like picking gear, man. It's like what makes sense for the song. What are you trying to communicate and say with your song? I think maybe the reason a lot of church music feels stale is because it is so similar and often regurgitated and just kind of saying the same thing over and over. I think that's why a lot of people seem to have a disconnect with it. It's certainly why I've had a disconnect with it a lot of times. And so, I'm just looking for stuff that I connect with and stuff that speaks to me on a human or on a deeper level. That can be hard to put into words, what that is or what that means. But that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for music that like resonates on a deeper level than just like, oh, that sounds cool.
What would you say are some of the influences that you think affected how you approach music with Bethel in particular? Like what inspired you, in terms of artists or guitar players' approach that you sort of, took liberties with or influenced how you played some of that music? Anybody in particular?
For the Bethel music stuff, we drew a lot of influence from bands like The National or The Killers or M83. A lot of like modern music like that, in the realm of like having one or two guitar players, there are always parts that fit kind of together. Mm-hmm. That was really our goal, whether it was, me playing along with, Dan or Gabe or me and Bobby. We were just looking for two parts that fit together and made the song, because that's just, again, referencing bands like the National, like they do that guitar interplay so well. And God, there's a ton of bands that do it. So it was really just whatever we were kind of into at the time, whether it was that or, there's a lot of Coldplay influence on the sound. There were times that, like, I remember I was like obsessed with the Police while we were working on Have It All. And so Cali's song Spirit Move, like I'm just like, how close can I get to ripping off Andy Summers? Because that's what was inspiring me, and it felt like that's what was helping communicate the vibe of that song. So, you're just looking for that perfect fit at this point where you can, take an influence and make it match what somebody else's art is supposed to be. Yeah.
Did you use the Electro Harmonix Electric Mistress on that, like Andy did for the?
No, that would have been your Landau chorus. So I didn't have exactly the appropriate gear, but ballpark, we got there.
You can get kind of flangey with it for sure.
Yeah, that pedal does a lot, man. I've got a little trick with it too, because running it in the switcher, the thing I love about that chorus pedal specifically is like when you kick it on, it just goes mega wide, like almost like kind of flips your phase and just sends things like way far out. And so with the switcher, I'll actually set it up sometimes to not only turn on the loop with the pedal in it, but also flip the phase. So then it's like you get two chorusing sounds, one super wide and one a little more narrow, out of just that, first voice. And then you can go to the other side and, almost get like rotary sounds out of it or something.
Yeah.
Like it's a super versatile pedal.
They're going for so much money now. I can't believe it on Reverb, because I think I sold it for like $200. Because the Arion chorus, if you're not familiar with it, it's literally like, I think it's a $50 pedal.
Yeah.
That we were gutting and like completely redoing, and I think we were selling it for $200. And even though it sounds like a lot considering how much it was, I have to tell you that half the pedals that we would get in from Arion, because we were buying it directly from them, half of them never worked.
Oh
so when
God.
we get them, you'd have to repair it and then mod it.
Yeah, and then mod it. Oh man.
And so it was a real nightmare. You know?
It sounds awful.
And so that was really. I remember it being so tricky and having to figure out how to do a production line where you could drill out the plastic enclosure, because enclosure's all plastic. And
jeez, man,
there wasn't a lot of there's only one company at that time that made a 4-pull double throw switch, instead of the 3-pull double throw. So we only had one company, and like, man, there'd be months where the quality control on those switches were so bad, and we'd have 10 of them, 20 in a row that would go bad. It was just like, it was really tough. So that was short-lived, but man, now they're going for like $450, $500 sometimes.
Yeah, it's frustrating because I had bought a second one at one point, and before, like, I feel like right before too, like it was the timing on my part was so bad. Right before they kind of started going haywire a little bit, I traded it to David Paleo because he had messed around with it and been like, oh my God, I know you have a second one, like trade it for me and I'll give you a really, really great deal on a bunch of tech work. And that dude's just the man. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll totally do that. And then now I'm kind of like, oh man, I wish I would have traded him a different pedal or something. But I guess it couldn't have gone to a better guy. So
that was several setups ago, right?
Oh man,
you used
many setups and many moons ago.
Yeah. It's a cool pedal. I definitely
so
I had to buy one off of Reverb because I never saved one. So I had to go back and buy one. This was a couple of years ago, so I have one. I didn't pay that much for it, but I think I probably paid maybe $280, $290, definitely more than it was when I originally sold them.
Yeah. Well, I'm watching them when they pop up, and I'm hoping if they ever hit a little dip in the market, that's my time, man. I'm just gonna snatch another one up because
do it.
They're too good not to have.
Do it. Yeah, they're great. I love them. So I want to get into gear recommendations. This is something that I've been asking all of the guests. I know that there's some signature Pope sounds, but I want to just kind of go through kind of category by category and talk about some of your favorites And then also anywhere in there, if you want to insert any sleeper pieces of gear, whether that's guitars or amps or things that are sort of under the radar that people should know about that they don't know about, you feel free to insert those too. So I want to start with kind of the early part of the chain. Let's start with compressors. What is your favorite compressors?
I've kind of funny, like I went from being one of those like always on compressor guys, certainly with the Bethel music thing, because I was backlining amps all the time, so you never know what you're gonna get. You know, always needing to sweeten things up a little bit. So I don't use pedal compressors a ton lately. Between having an 1176 in the rack and using my own amps, I don't super use one a lot, but the latest ones that I've liked a lot were the Keeley Compressor Pro. That thing's like having a full-on, like plug-in or a studio compressor on your board. The thing is awesome. And then I also, to plug you, really love the Nile. It's such a great, really even, like it's got this chonky sound to it. Like that's the best way, like chonky is the best way I can describe it. And then, with the preamp side, kind of emulating that like console sound. That's like a big thing for me. Like I love DI guitars right now. So it's those are kind of the two compressors. If I'm going to use a pedal compressor, those are the go-tos for me.
What about going next in the signal chain, overdrives? What are your kind of top overdrives?
Well, ever since the Benson preamp came out, that's been a staple for me. It's just that pedal, like no matter what guitar or what amp I'm using, doesn't matter how bad the amp is, like doesn't matter what guitar I'm playing. Like if I've got that pedal, I can get a sound I'm usually pretty stoked with.
Yeah, so it's very much a chameleon, I've found. It really works great no matter what you put that into. Another one that we've talked about that kind of does that is I don't know if you agree with this, but I found it to be true as well, is the Ibanez Mostortion, the MT10.
Yeah, that totally, it's like those two pedals just have like such a sound that they impart on whatever you plug it into. Yeah. And it just, for some reason, it just works. Like it's hard to describe it any other way. So that's usually kind of like the first grab for me. I mean, gosh, it could be anything these days. I've been liking the JHS Clover a lot. That's a really cool pedal, and I love that he put a mids control in it, and then also with the ability to do the stock FA1 thing or eliminate the EQ entirely or add the mids in. Like that's another kind of chameleon pedal, but totally different than the preamp in the sense that you can have it be a little more neutral and a little bit closer to what the amp is doing, or drastically color it. So that's been a good one. Been using the HRM a lot lately. Freaking love that thing, man. Gabe Wilson, to reference that guy again, he lives up in Battleground, Washington, and I normally go out 2 or 3 times a year to do a record with him. And the last session we were doing, he was like hell bent on having like these like really 90s like distorted rock guitar tracks. And so the HRM like into the 60s super reverb, he's got like a little bit of grit from the amp, little bit of grit from the pedal, was just like nails.
Nice.
Sounded baller. So those have kind of been the 3. I usually have an old Rat around. Those are kind of useful. And then if like a ZVEX SHO or something can be considered overdrive.
What about for boosts?
So then, definitely an SHO. Obviously the Vertex boost, whether it's being used as an actual boost or, the volume, was a big game changer for me as well as a lot of other folks. And then I guess I don't know if this is a sleeper pedal or not, but I think really, I mean, the only other pedal I've really used like a boost is those old 2-knob Emerson M Drive pedals.
Yep.
I feel like those were kind of popular for a while and then died out a little bit. And I know his new version has a tone knob, so maybe that's more like an overdrive. But that was a really good sounding boost pedal. Just gain all the way off, crank the volume. Sounded really smooth. Yeah. So I'm sure you can get those on a budget, these days.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, probably. I thought he always did a pretty good job of keeping his prices pretty reasonable. I remember even knew they weren't that expensive.
No, I think they're like sub $200 or something.
Yeah.
Like, It's great.
Yeah. He had some cool pedals. I remember maybe around 2016, seeing him on a lot of boards.
Yeah. I don't even remember when I first got one, but I literally tweeted one day, back when I had a Twitter, like, I need a new overdrive boost pedal. What should I get? And I got a bunch of people saying stuff, and then that was the only one that I didn't recognize. I was like, oh, what is that? And so I looked him up, and I was like, oh, Tulsa, Oklahoma guy. I got to check this dude out. Messaged him. He happened to be into the Bethel music thing, and so he sent one out to me, and I was just like, yep, this sounds awesome. And yeah, used them a lot ever since.
Nice. What about modulation stuff? We talked about the Arion, the Vertex Arion modded chorus. What other mod stuff are you into?
Dude, I am obsessed with modulation pedals. I really love vibrato pedals. Like I've probably bought 10 of them in the past 2 years or something like that. I just love that effect. And I keep coming back to the Earthquaker Aqueduct. Like, pound for pound, price-wise, size-wise, and sound-wise, it sounds great. The little random mode totally sounds like, like tape modulation or something. Mm-hmm. It's got the little envelope settings where, like, the harder you play, the more it will like dive the depth or the pitch or something. Mm-hmm. And so you can do some pretty interesting sounds with it, but also get some normal sounds. So I kind of keep coming back to that, or like a Walrus Julia or something is kind of a good, like, if I've got a fly rig and I want to take like a chorus and a vibrato, I'll just take that pedal. Right. The Caroline Somersault has also been like a really good one for me lately. It's kind of like also in that chorus vibrato realm, but I guess he based it off a delay chip or something, so it kind of has this, like, it's like latency, but not like, almost like a double tracker kind of vibe to it. So those have kind of been the staples.
Well,
for me
most
lately.
of the chorus stuff and that will have a delay chip in them.
Yeah. But, and that's the other thing too. With some of the vibrato pedals, with a lot of them, it's kind of surprising how much latency there is with those. So those can be cool for some stuff. Like it's not over here right now. I've got this Hungry Robot vibrato pedal that has like a crazy filter in it and like a pad. And that pedal's great, but when you just, set it for vibrato, it's pretty latent. So that only comes out on special occasion.
And then for delay and reverb, it's Strymon, Timeline, and Big Sky.
Almost never. I actually don't even own them anymore. Sorry to let a bunch of people down. Jimmy, our other, studio partner, he's got them. So if I need them, I use them. But I kind of reached a point with those things, like, and I feel bad because, you use something for so long and then people see you stop using it. And it's like, oh, you don't like that anymore? You hate, like, freak out a little bit. Like, those pedals are awesome. I just used them for so long and got so used to the way they sounded. I'm like, I got to change things up. Yeah. Because for me anymore, like, the point is, like, does this, like, do I smile when I turn it on? Does it inspire me to play? So reverb right now is a plug-in because I'm just working out of a little corner in here right now. But pedal-wise, I really, really like the Maris Mercury 7. Okay. That's such a cool reverb for, like, the big spacey thing. I mean, so much of guitar, whether it's church music or not, is like you throw down the normal guitars and then you're getting ready to pack up and leave the session, and the producer's like, hey man, can you give me some, like, whale mating calls and some, like, robot noises? And you're like, yeah, sure man. So that pedal's good for the calling your whale friends. And then I also really like the Nunaber pedals for reverb. Those are really, really great. Nice. Delay wise, what's over here? I've got a Caroline Kilobyte pedal. Have you messed with those? Those are really cool sounding.
Yeah.
Kind of that, like,
cool,
dark modulated. You can, make it really, really gritty or really clean. That pedal's extra fun because all the labeling is done in, like, hieroglyphics.
Right.
So even though I use it, like, almost every day, I'm always forgetting what knob does what. So that just kind of makes it interesting. And And then I guess kind of a popular one, unless you're Derek Wells. I love the Volante these days, man. That thing is that thing is awesome.
Yeah.
I laughed so hard when you repeated that, or when he answered that question, because the two things he said about it, I was like, oh man, that's exactly what I do. Like I run it into a MIDI switcher and via the MIDI switcher, clock it to tempo. So I was like, oh, that's totally funny. But I mean, obviously, like he's the GOAT, and I totally
said
have been in that position.
M9.
Yeah, dude, M9 all the way. All the way. I got to go get one of those things now after watching that with him. I mean, between him and Bukovac having them, if I'm in Nashville, I guess I got to jump on board.
Yeah, you just have to, even though he didn't change the switches, I highly recommend that you do that because it's speculative. It's actually just a spring actuator that's pushing down like just a pad that has the switch.
Oh, yeah.
And so when the spring, loses its tension, it just won't even,
Or if you stomp on it hard enough for long enough, they actually rock it off of the pedal.
Oh, do they?
I've seen guys there's some dudes at Bethel that had them, and I guess like his tap tempo switch or something like shot off on stage or something.
It's
Spring-loaded,
so easy
man.
to mod them. It's so easy to mod them, though. You just use a momentary switch, and it's just two wires that you're basically just replacing. So it's pretty easy to do. In fact, after I talked with Derek, I found one on Craigslist. I'm supposed to meet the guy this weekend. So
okay, there you go.
He has a brand new one for $200.
Well, I'll be waiting for that Rig Doctor video on modding your M9.
Well, I thought it'd be cool. I could build like a Nashville inspired rig because I have the MT10, I have original Nobles, I'll have the M9. I'm like almost all the way there. I need a compressor. I have a vintage Dynacomp. I put a Rat on there. I have a VB2 vibrato. A lot of them have that, and I have a Memory Man.
Dude, so, there you go.
I got my Nashville rig. I'm ready to go.
You got the old Buko board down.
Yeah, and I built Tom. I either built him 2 or 3 rigs, and then one of those rigs got sent back to me because Dan Huff bought it.
Okay.
And then I had to go through it and make sure it was good for Dan.
Huff approved.
But they were almost the same rigs.
Yeah, I've seen him use 3-4 different pedal boards, and it's always got the same stuff on it.
Yeah, they all definitely have My Boost on it. And some of them, for a while, he was using that Memory Man with Hazarai, the one that was kind of like a blue. And I modded one of those. God, it was a nightmare. Because he wanted a volume control on it, but it's all digital. You know? And so, and there's no schematic or anything like that to really figure out where to break in. So what I ended up doing, because he said that he liked running the depth of or the what do you like running? No, he liked running the mix really high. And when you did that, it would attenuate the level a lot.
Yeah.
And so he needed a way to make it up. So I basically built a Vertex boost on the output.
No way.
Of the entire thing. And so, if you look at, I actually have, there's pictures of it on our website of it. You should open up, there's a boost circuit, that's hanging, that's attached to the bottom of it. And then there's a knob on the side to adjust the volume. And I remember doing that for him. And then 20 people the next day, all Nashville guys. Hey, can you, I didn't end up doing it. It was too much of a problem.
Yeah, man.
But I was the first guy to rehouse those ODR ones, and I will admit that that Exactone perfected it. But
those guys are great, man. I had a couple times where TSA just obliterated a rig that I had, and so I've called those guys a couple times for a cable in a pinch, not having my own little solder station quite yet, and those guys are awesome, man. Those dudes do killer work.
Yeah, they are great, and the thing that I think I think a lot of people don't realize is that I don't build rigs other than for the purposes of tutorials on YouTube, really. So if I'm doing one, it's for a specific reason to teach a specific thing. It's not just because I'm offering the service generally. Yeah. But the thing I would say about Exactone, which is a real differentiator between them and almost every other person that is doing rigs professionally, is the guy that's behind the scenes is Barry O'Neill, and he is one of the smartest engineers for this type of stuff with pedals and amplifiers. And in fact, he used to have a company called Kingdom Amplification. Then he's got lots of experience with racks and all sorts of stuff, but is really like a real engineer. Like I think he was like a teacher at a university, at one point, teaching electronic engineering. And the real differentiator between the really great guys and the assembly guys is that when stuff goes wrong, which it invariably does.
Yeah.
Do you have what are the tricks that you bring to the table where you can create workarounds that are not just masking symptoms, but that actually address the root cause?
That's so true, man.
And that's really the difference, because there's some cases where a guy who just does beautiful work and the assembly is nice will be fine. But the problem is that when stuff starts going wrong, that guy's going to have one or two things to pull out. And the guy that's the engineer, he's going to be like, okay, let's find the root cause. Let's just not throw a buffer here because we knew it solved the problem in this particular environment. But we know, 20 days later when you're in Italy and you have this other environment, who knows if that's going to solve the problem anymore. And so that's one thing I think is a real differentiator with them, is that they really know the difference between creating sort of a quick fix of a symptom versus going for the root cause. And that's really why, if you're going to pay somebody to build a rig, those are the type of guys that you want to find.
Absolutely, man.
And there's very few guys that are that, and and that may not always be your thing. You may not have really complicated system. Everything's in series. You can get away with, something else there. But yeah. That was a long aside, but I think that it's worth giving those guys a shout out, and I'm glad that they were able to help you with your rig. And
yeah, man,
we all
good dudes over there.
Yeah. Oh, and I wanted to ask you about this. My other favorite line of Derek Wells is, and this has come up now a few times, like people have just messaged me this as they've watched it. My favorite line, and also other people agree, is when he was told in a session, I want it to be ethereal, like Hotel California. make the guitar tones ethereal, like they are in Hotel California. That's the best one. So I'll be waiting for one that you say, from a session that you've been in where you have like these two really opposing tonalities and timbres that are being requested of you simultaneously.
I'll be on the lookout
way
for
through
it.
The Nashville.
I've had a couple times where it normally Gabe Wilson, man, that guy. Mega creative, and he's usually down to try anything in the studio. But there's been a couple of times where him or even Dan have been like, "Can you play that a little worse?" And I'm like, "Wait, what do you mean? Like, can you play it like someone who's only been playing guitar for like 6 months?" Yeah. And that like I'm like, throw anything at me, and like worst comes to worst, I'll go out and listen to a reference really quick and come back and have an idea of what to do. But for the life of me, like I still can't figure that one out. Like, how do you make your fingers go back in time like that? I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a thing, like I was mentioning this the other day that like, guys like Tim Pierce, I've heard him say like, especially when the grunge thing was huge, like they wanted him to play like Kurt Cobain, you know, and he's a much more technical and sophisticated of a player than that. And so to ask a guy who's like such a technician to then go back and like, do the grunge rock thing,
I swear
that's
for
hard.
Like any guitar player who's like, really studied and tried to like be really, really good and proficient on their instrument, like going back and trying to nail that kind of vibe is the hardest thing to do, because it's so anti everything you really go for. It's one thing I actually really respect, just to harp on Bukovac for a minute. Like, the control that dude has over his right hand is just insane. I mean, I'm sure you've been watching his homeschool videos, like the rest of us. And it blows my mind. He can play something that's, like, sloppy but not sloppy, but then, like, instantly shift into something that's, like, perfectly locked in and in time. And I'm like, yep, that's the goal, to be able to do it clean and sloppy and have it all that awesome.
Yeah. I've had some. I thought about doing a video, and I wasn't sure, what Tom would think about it. But like, I wanted to like kind of go through like the 3 pedal boards that I built for him, like retrospectively, and then sort of talk about like things that he told me and like taste things that I think are actually really apropos to regular guitar players, because one thing that if you look at his rig over the last 10 years, it really hasn't changed very much.
No.
Like in the other rigs that he's had built, like they're thematic for like a purpose. Like I saw that Exact Tone built him like an all Electro-Harmonix pedal board.
Yeah.
You know, and stuff like that. But as far as his session stuff, it's been really the same stuff for a long time.
Yeah.
And he had said something to me that he thought that the best session guys were great editors of their gear. And really they had these distinctions where they understood that there was sort of a critical mass or a threshold with which if you went over, it was sort of like you were giving yourself unnecessary things to have to edit in the process of doing a session. And
Absolutely.
he's really stayed pretty much in fidelity to what that looks like. You know, he's got a lot of the same stuff. The only thing that I really have seen him go away from is he used to love this pedal called the V-Wah from Boss.
Okay.
And it was like a modeling wah / expression for wah,
Weird.
rotary, like a few other things, you know.
Was it that weird like black and silver one, and it had that like really jagged top or something?
Yeah.
Okay, I've seen those. I remember those.
That was it. He used to use those a lot, and he always liked the big blue Peterson tuners.
Yeah.
The really giant ones.
Oh yeah.
And for a long time, I mean, this has changed recently, but for a long time, he always used the Box of Rock, which, you know, had like an overdrive side and then I think an SHO on the other side.
Yeah, those are great.
He used that for a long time. And there was always a Memory Man on there for a long time. And, you know, I think the M9 had come out, but it wasn't really popular yet. So he had a couple of things. He had like the Memory Man. He had a Brigadier. Yep. And then he had that other Memory Man with Hazarai on there. So there's like two different types of Memory Man. But really, it's been the same. It's been really the same thing. And so anyway, I thought about doing this sort of retrospective, but I thought, oh, you know, I should clear this with him first before I really go into like, because he gave me a lot of really specifics on different pedals and stuff, and why he chose his pedals. And
well, I'd sure watch the hell out of that, man.
Yeah, I think it'd be cool.
Sounds really interesting.
You know, just wouldn't want to do it. Be like, he's like, oh, I told you about that in confidence. Not that any of this was like, you know, state secrets or anything like that, or you know, anything to be embarrassed about.
Maybe with him, you know, it seems like what might have been a little bit of a secret in the past might be more of a thing to share with people now. I think he's hinted at that a little bit, just kind of like maybe like a little bit of a temperament change between being really burned out and kind of where he is now. Like I can kind of understand that my own way, you know.
Yeah, his attitude certainly seems a lot different in terms of his relationship toward the public. I mean, he was always a guy that was approachable, and when his shop was open, Second Gear in Nashville, which sort of predated when you were there, you know, you could just go in and he'd be still hanging out there, and he'd offer you a beer, and you know, and was really cool. But in any case, I thought he was always very gracious with me, and it was cool. And to my knowledge, we were the only pedal brand that he stocked in his store that wasn't on consignment.
Oh, you go.
But he only would buy boosts. He wouldn't buy anything else in the line. So he bought 12 Vertex boosts, and that was it.
I get it, man. I would not have any problem with having 12 of those around. I've got one, and Jimmy's got one that I steal from him all the time. And every once in a while, I'm like, oh man, I need to get another one of those things.
Yeah, we still got some red ones hanging around, although everybody's been saying, why did you get rid of the gray? They want the gray back. So I'm thinking I'll let our paint manufacturer or painters for our metal manufacturer, you guys know.
I'll hit you up for a red one before those go, because I saw the red ones come out and was like, ooh, that's good looking.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I really appreciate you indulging me for the last hour here and going through the gear, going through some of the tones, and I really want to thank you for your contribution to what you've done for music, and sincerely, I really do feel that like some guys may have started the trend, but you, I think, really helped cement a decade of CCM tones that I think are going to live in perpetuity to define really a sound. And I'm really excited to see what other guys do who come through Bethel or wherever they may be in whatever worship team they're with, to kind of forge whatever the next look of the music is going to be.
Me too, man. Me too.
And I hope that they do some cool stuff. They start experimenting with other things that we never thought to do, and just like you guys were borrowing from other musical influences. I'm excited to see what that pivot looks like, and to see what the next round of worship powerhouses are going to look like. And
I know, man. Me too. It feels like it go so many different ways right now, and I'm excited for all of them. So, yeah, man.
Yeah, in particular, the polka style.
Oh yeah, for sure. Polka, and polka all the time is definitely the next move in the church music scene. So
yeah.
Hopefully these guys will start throwing some, PAFs in their accordions, and
right, yeah,
then we'll be going.
Just like Weird Al.
Oh yeah.
By the way, this is a message to anybody that's listening to this. My one dream rig to build, the one player that I want to build a rig for that I have not, is Weird Al Yankovic. So if anybody has the connection, I want to build him an accordion rig. So connect us. This will be the best Rig Doctor episode of all time.
Oh man, I would love to watch that.
All right. Well, thank you again, Michael. And
yeah, man, thanks for having me.
So that was Michael Pope. What a cool guy. What a cool interview. He's always been so gracious to me and so great. I really love talking with him, hanging out, and getting to geek out on gear with him like we did today. That was certainly a lot of fun. I think he had some great pedal recommendations in there as well. And one of the items that he mentioned that I thought was actually a great sleeper pedal that we don't talk about enough is the SHO from Zvex. Really great boost that definitely does something special to the tone that I think is really cool. And also the JHS Kilt. I think that's another one that, some guys in the CCM scene know about, but it's actually a really great overdrive and kind of distortion pedal that I think sounds really, really good through clean amps. So definitely another one in there that I think it should be a consideration if you're considering looking at some sleeper pedals that maybe are a little bit under the radar. I can see that they're going for bargains right now on Reverb, so definitely check those out. I want to thank everybody who's behind the scenes that makes this podcast possible. Kevin Walt from Blue Microphones. Thank you to him for providing the boom arms, the Yeti microphones, the pop filters, everything that we need in order to make this sound great. I also want to thank others behind the scene, Hunter Harrison for mixing and editing, for Mason Mejia for co-producing, and for Tim Marco for creating all the music to make this podcast possible. Thank you to all those people. And until next time, I am Mason Marangella, the Rig Doctor. See you later.